everyone. Our next speaker is Maulline. She's a consultant in energy logistics chapter from Ethiopia, and she will talk about renewable energy policy programs in Africa. Welcome, Maulline. How are you doing?
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you so much for the introduction. So, I'll talk about renewable energy policy programs in Africa. Despite almost every country in Africa having introduced many laudable and strong pro-poor energy policies, the continent still grapples with energy poverty. If African countries are to achieve a reduction in this energy poverty and reach their goal of universal energy access, then policy and regulatory frameworks, approaches, and resources to support energy service delivery need ongoing constructive review. How many of you have experienced a power blackout or load shedding? I'm not sure why, but for some reason, whenever there's a power blackout, that's the time that all your electronic devices suddenly decide to go flat. Imagine for a moment that there is no electricity, and it so happens that you forgot to purchase fuel for your backup diesel generator. Your smartphone battery is almost flat, and your laptop has just shut down, and it's only been an hour. How do you feel? Are you feeling disconnected from your family and friends, or maybe even the rest of the world? Well, you should be. Because oftentimes I wonder what would happen if governments across the world decided to stop investing in fossil fuels. The fact that a power blackout can make us feel disconnected is clear evidence of our dependency on fossil fuels, a dependency that forces us to continue to use, develop, and invest in such energy to maintain the standards of living that we enjoy today. In the current digital age, I think it is fair to surmise that most people equate fuel to connectivity. Many people think that without fossil fuels, there can be no energy, and without energy, there is no power, and without power, there is no internet, and without the internet, well, their life is pretty much over. They simply cannot quote unquote live without digital connectivity. I can only relate this to the 20 can only relate this to the 2014 film Transcendence, where we are forced to unplug and go back to the drawing board. Although the film is largely focused on artificial intelligence, I think the ending is quite relevant to the point that I'd like to make. In the span of 2 decades, we have moved most of our interactions from the physical spaces to the digital ones. These days, most of our interactions, be it social or work related, tend to happen online. It is therefore not too difficult to see why fuel can be equated to connectivity. We have created a lifestyle where fossil fuels are the glue that holds everything together. This means that we feel obligated to continue investing in non-renewable energy in spite of our ever-increasing scientific knowledge about the environmental price that we pay for using such energy. This is our reality, ladies and gentlemen, but it doesn't have to be. You see, fossil fuels are non-renewable. Once they're exhausted across the planet, that's it. No more energy can be generated from them. Because many of us are aware of this, we are keen on making sure that when that happens, we are not caught off guard, that we, in fact, have a plan. And renewable energy is our plan. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa is a potential but crippled giant. It is endowed with a diversity of non-renewable and renewable energy resources and evenly distributed across the continent. They include relatively important deposits of oil, gas, and coal. The continent's hydropower potential roughly amounts to 12% of the world's total. Africa also has abundant renewable energy with solar radiation ranging from 5 to 7 kilowatt hour per square meter. Relatively, relatively strong wind potential in northern, southern, and eastern Africa, and large amounts of land that are suitable for biofuel production. The fact that the continent has all these resources yet still continues to struggle with energy poverty is something that baffles me. And I wanted to understand why this was the case. Notably, there is a growing concern among policymakers that efforts to disseminate renewable energy technologies have fallen short of expectations. Despite despite recognition that renewable energy technologies can offer substantial energy for sub-Saharan Africa, they have not attracted the level of investment and policy commitment that they require. For instance, why is it that resources allocated to development of renewable energy technologies are negligible in comparison to those awarded to the conventional energy sector? What are the policy and legal barriers to developing and disseminating renewable energy technologies? My mind was racing with these questions. So when I was approached by a representative from the Ministry of Energy to assist in drafting legislation on renewable energy, I was quite excited because finally I would have the answers to my questions. Well, I got more than I bargained for, in a good way, of course. You see, ladies and gentlemen, the importance of government policies cannot be overstated. Experience in Africa demonstrates that the introduction and success of any renewable energy technology is to a large extent dependent on the existing policy framework. Government policies are important because of their ability to create an enabling environment for mobilizing resources and encouraging private sector investment. A quick walk down memory lane shows that most of the early policy initiatives on renewable energy in Africa were largely driven by the oil crisis of the 70s. In response, governments created either an autonomous Ministry of Energy or department that was dedicated to the development and promotion of sound energy policies. However, once the energy crisis subsided, government support for renewable energy technology also diminished. This was common across the region, with most of the remaining supports being at the rhetorical level. As someone who is passionate about people-centered legislation, just drafting legislation would not have been enough. It had to be evidence-based and one that would not fail upon implementation. At the outset and during the drafting process, I wanted my team to engage proactively and systematically with our future by considering multiple scenarios. I wanted us to escape the pitfalls of being caught up in the short-term urgencies of the present, which oftentimes lead to poor decision and policy making. You see, we are now coming to terms with the fact that our world has changed beyond our industrial era ways of thinking. Linear approaches to problem solving are simply not enough. Our ability to adapt and respond to change, living in harmony with ourselves and the biosphere, requires that we use innovative holistic systems that allow us to mediate between the need for action and the awareness of complexity. It is this continuous approach and mode of strategy and development that can help us to shape a better future. It is this mindset that has helped us through many of our policy formulation projects. The National Energy and Petroleum Policy, Small-Scale Renewable Grid Connection Guidelines, and Solar Photovoltaic System Regulations are just some of the renewable energy legislation that I was privileged to help bring to life. Ladies and gentlemen, fossil fuels are not inexhaustible. They will run out eventually. But despite having drafted all this legislation, my experiences within the policy front of the renewable energy sector have always been varied. For instance, in Kenya, I was largely focused on drafting legislation at a more general level. In Ethiopia, it was slightly different. I was focused on rural energy technologies at the rural level. I was and still is, excuse me, I was and still is keen on developing and progressive energy, clear-cut and progressive energy policies that purposely encourages productive energy end use in rural areas using renewable energy technologies. As advisor to the Council of Ministers, I was keen on having the government widen the scope for to include underutilized geothermal resources. This was this was informed by the findings and conclusions of a country study that was conducted by AFRIPREN, which is an African initiative on energy, environment, and sustainable development. You see, this study had revealed glaring gaps in the existing energy policy that needed to be addressed. Harnessing and disseminating low cost energy resources within various regions of the country has always been a challenge. So, we saw that reviving the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam project would be a long term solution to addressing the energy problem in Ethiopia. Even though the project has faced its fair share of controversy, I would like you to know that the intention behind it has always been well meaning. Don't get me wrong, I'm not here to try and persuade you to one side or the other of the debate. If anything, my intention is to share a little bit of my world with you in the hope of making you advocates for evidence informed policy making within the renewable energy sector. In South Africa, I went back to my researcher role. My focus was on the real and tangible economic benefits such as income generation and job creation that renewable energy technologies could deliver at both the micro and macro levels. For example, renewable energy technologies are generally more labor intensive than conventional energy projects. This means that they can help to address the unemployment problems for the poor population. The challenge that I've always faced is that empirical data on the actual livelihood potential for renewable energy technologies is not widely available. Although this has improved over the years, I think that it can still get better because such data can greatly assist in encouraging higher budgetary allocation to the development of renewable energy resources. In the course of my career, I have realized that policymakers are particularly interested in revenue neutral policies and institutional measures. For instance, a good example is a recent project where we'd proposed removal of duties and taxes on renewable energy sources. From the Essentially, from the perspective of policymakers, removal of taxes and duties is seen as a loss of revenue, understandably so. As drafted, and the main primary concern that they had was how do we deal with that revenue loss? And as drafted, the argument that we made was that the loss in revenue could be recouped by the long term savings in imports of fossil fuels, such as petroleum, which generally require foreign currencies. Additionally, tax remittances from a vibrant local renewable energy sector could mitigate that loss. As you can see, at any one time, there are different moving parts of the policy of the policy board, as I like to call it, that as a policy drafter you must always be aware of. So it's sort of like I say this to say that the The most successful long, short, and medium term policy initiatives within the renewable energy sector have oftentimes been those that have been evidence that have been backed by empirical data. As I've previously stated, many countries within the region have introduced laudable and strong energy policies targeting their poor population. What many of them continue to struggle with is engendering large-scale distribution within their policy initiatives. This means that their policy and regulatory frameworks are in constant need of constructive review in a bid to achieve a reduction in that energy poverty. Ladies and gentlemen, as I've previously stated, fossil fuels are not inexhaustible. They will run out eventually. I know that by saying this, I may sound like a broken record because we've had this statement many times since the turn of the new millennium, yet we keep making new oil discoveries. If you forget everything else that I've said, I'd like you to remember that the adverse ecological impacts, such as climate change, air pollution, and land degradation that are associated with the extraction, development, and use of fossil fuels are too great to not consider sustainable, environmentally friendly alternatives. While renewable energy technologies cannot solve all our energy problems, they do have a significant potential to meet our growing energy requirements. I believe that all of us here can influence policy in one way or another. It does not matter who or where you are. All you need is a vision and the motivation to pursue it. I think that it's about time that we press the reset button, break the vicious cycles within the energy sector, and start creating virtuous cycles that actually give us a shot for the future. The good thing is that many African countries have realized this, and their energy policies and laws show a transformation over time of their approaches to survival strategy and tactics. They have moved from cyclical, reactive approaches through to linear predictive approaches, and we're now moving them to holistic systems approaches that recognize complexity and they need to plan for change. They need to plan change as well as plan for change within the context of multiple possible future scenarios. We need evidence informed policies that allow renewable energy technologies to flourish in our current knowledge society. We should not shy away from acknowledging that fact and advocating for policies that pursue cleaner, appropriate, sustainable, and environmentally friendly alternatives. Because at the end of the day, renewable energy technologies should not be our plan B, they should be our plan A. All of us, individually and collectively, can anticipate and influence the future that comes to pass. So let's not wait for time to run out. Thank you.
Thank you, Maulline. I really appreciate your talk. As I have visited like Rwanda before, I see many like solar panels, but actually the lack of coherent policy make it really hard to for this solar panel like plan to scale up. As I'm not sure if you have joined earlier this morning, we have like a CEO from Empress Energy. He is actually working on the microgrid a lot. So our audience is having like a few questions in regard to the microgrid, and like how do you see the microgrid in like in its application in Africa? So the first question is like, what is your view on the microgrid developments in Africa? Is the cost still a big challenge for scaling of microgrid? That's the first question.
Mhm.
Um,
Um,
And
Okay.
another question associated with a microgrid is that they're also curious about, is there any policy support for microgrid and the home solar products in Africa? Did you hear about Solar Sister? These are the two questions related to the microgrid.
Okay, so in response to the first question, what I would say is ideally it varies from country to country, because in Africa you find that there are some countries, like for instance, South Africa has made quite a good progress in terms of like entrenching policy that actually supports microgrids and fitting that into the to the national grid. However, you find that the costs of scaling are still quite a big challenge, and governments are not willing to sort of, let me not say not willing, are sort of like having a hard a challenge in terms of like extending more resources towards that area. And if you look like, let's say in other countries, like let's say within Eastern Africa, I'd say that countries like Kenya are quite ahead in terms of like trying to put more resources in the development of microgrids as compared to say Ethiopia, which is slowly coming into play and trying to be able to allocate more resources in that area. It's sort of like there's the problem has always been in terms of like the policy that is being developed to try and make um, create make more budgetary allocations for that, and it ties in with the argument that I was making, that the lack of empirical data to actually substantiate the need for having more investment directed towards that area. Then the next question in terms of like policy support, I think I've answered that in part, but I'll still go over it and say I have heard about the home solar systems, and it's also dependent. It varies from country to country. There are some countries that have really taken a lead in terms of like being able to entrench or to formulate policy that actually supports home solar systems. But there are others that are some countries that have still on the fence about it and have not really come up with good policy to sort of support that, because to them renewable energy technologies and especially solar and wind systems cost a lot, and they are more urgent quote unquote concerns that the governments are more worried about. I hope I've answered your questions.
Yes, definitely. We
Mm-hmm.
also have one question from Max Wong, but we are running out of time. So I
Mm-hmm.
already copy and paste the question in our chat box, and you can
Okay.
type your answer in and answer his
All right.
question.
All right. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much, Maulline, for your presentation.
Thank you so much for having me.